Welcome. I'm Dave Garrison. I'm the chair of the Falmouth Affordable Housing Committee, and I'm glad to welcome you here to this session that's being put on by the Falmouth Housing Partnership, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Let me just say first that FCTV is recording the show, and so we're going to be using mics, and when we get to the Q&A, we want you to use the mics as well. We've got munchies over there. Please take whatever you like and make yourself comfortable. Let me introduce first and the chair of our select board has just come in. Nice to have you here. Welcome, sir. Let me introduce the members of our housing partnership group. Colin Reed, who is also a new member of the select board, is right over here. And he's the director of the community engagement shop at Hui. Kelly McEwen, who is a colleague of mine on the housing committee, sits over here. She also works down in that same complex as Colin. Kim Fish is our superannuated housing coordinator right here. Mara Titus, who is sitting over there, is the realtor with Kinlan Grover Compass Real Estate. Mike Kasparian is part of our group, although he's not here this evening. And then Laura Moynihan heads the Falmouth Housing Trust, and I'll introduce her more in just a moment. So the mission for our little group is one of public education to advance the understanding of affordable housing issues here in Falmouth. This is our third forum. We've been doing approximately one a year. The first one a couple of years ago was focused on the impact of affordable housing shortage on local employers. We had one last May, which was focused on the work that was being done by specific organizations here in town, particularly the Housing Authority, the Falmouth Housing Trust, the Housing Assistance Corporation, Habitat, and so forth. We're focused, as is the town, as is Kim, as is Jed Cornack here, who's here, was the town planner, on the implementation of the town's housing production plan. It's a plan which is renewed every 5 years and has a set of goals and strategies. Our committee has been tracking some of those strategies in particular where we think we can make a contribution. Kim and Jed worry about this all the time. The select board pays attention to this plan. And so our housing partnership is also focused on this. And there are several references in the housing production plan to the need to share information, to have educational sessions, to talk about the issues in public sessions, and that's what this is about. So this evening, we're going to have a presentation, and then we'll take some time for Q&A, and then at the appropriate time when we're ready to finish, the partnership members will hang around. We've got some charts in the back, and we'll be glad to stay here and talk with folks about individual issues and questions that you have beyond whatever we talk about in the session. So let me introduce Laura Moynihan. Laura is going to make the presentation. We're focused tonight on zoning reform issues to see what we can do in the town to expand the number of options that we would have available to deal with our difficulties that we have with affordable housing. And I'm very glad to have Laura here to start us off. Laura?
Thank you, Dave, and welcome everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So our title of our forum is Adding Housing to Our Neighborhoods with Zoning Reform. And we thought that it would be good to start the presentation with a bit of a history on the background of zoning laws, because where we are today is really a result of the historic zoning laws, which were developed in or about the 1920s, essentially to segregate uses in different areas of a community, factories and industry, apartments, single-family homes. And through up to the 1970s, we had the Fair Housing Act of 1968, which allowed for increased access to suburban housing. And one of the impacts of that was more restrictive zoning laws in the suburbs or in other municipalities. What also caused or created more restrictive zoning laws was a response to the increase in home values in the 1970s. The home becoming a larger portion of a person's assets, and homeowners looking to guard their investment. So single-family only neighborhoods became predominant in or about the 1970s, and we saw the zoning laws respond to the desire at that time for that kind of protection, which at the time was thought to be the way to go, but as we have now seen, change is in the air, and that's really what this forum is about. In Falmouth, we had our first zoning bylaw in 1926, which, similar to the national level, created these various zoning districts where certain uses were allowed or not allowed. Minimum lot sizes for new homes were established at 7,500 square feet, which isn't really that big, but that was the minimum in 1926, and for duplex housing. And up to the 1960s, we saw development in the community that did focus on starter homes, small lot development. We see Ambets Avenue downtown as an example of the American dream of home ownership developing here with 7,500 square foot lots around 1949, 1950, and other areas certainly in town where those lot sizes are there. So in the 1960s, we did have multifamily apartments being allowed in residential districts. This is an example of a property in Falmouth Heights that used to be an apartment complex and is now condominiums, but at one point it was apartments, and there were, I think, 12 units there. And in or about 1969, that was allowed. You could build apartment buildings in residential districts. Then we see in the 1970s, we start to see the more restrictive zoning coming in. So multifamily apartments in the residence districts, those provisions of the zoning bylaw were eliminated, and we see more of a predominantly single-family detached home only type of zoning in residential districts. This picture is a picture of an apartment building in downtown Falmouth that was built before these prohibitions came into play in a neighborhood with other single-family detached homes. We also saw in the 70s 1 acre plus lot sizes started to develop. That was a response to the more restrictive zoning, but also for water resource protection, open space preservation, which, you know, are issues that do go hand in hand with housing, and we recognize that. But it's interesting that 1 acre zoning, which started to develop here in town in the 70s, is a very large piece of land for one home. And you can see from this picture of a football field, it's about 3/4 of a football field. And we superimposed the 7,500 square foot lot, which was the original lot size from, say, an Ambets subdivision, to show you the comparison of how much land is really involved in 1 acre zoning for one home. And in the 1980s to the present time, more 1 and 2 acre zoning was developed in town. And this is an example of the Bonnie Lane subdivision. 2 very large lots shown here, both about 2 acres for one home. So 1.5 football fields for each of those, and 16 homes on 21 acres is the density for that subdivision. So that's where we are now, and what are the impacts of that? What are the impacts of that history? Single-family zoning only and large lots. The impact is that we have a limited housing supply, we have increased prices and land costs, and we have less downsizing opportunity for older people. And we have shown here a graph on the national level just showing the increased prices in housing from 1965 up to 2025, a significant increase in the price of housing because of this type of reaction in the zoning world. So another impact of the single-family only zoning and the large lots is that we have fewer starter homes being developed for families, small homes. The average age nationally now for a first-time home buyer is 37. And if you think about that, traditionally, historically, you graduate from high school, you go into the trades, you go to college, you start working, you rent, and eventually you're able to save enough to buy a small home, and from that small home, you go into a bigger home. That's sort of the historic evolution. But that doesn't happen anymore. So what's happening now is that we have that decline of the American dream of home ownership, and we have an increased demand for rental apartments. So here in Falmouth, this is from the Cape Cod Commission, just showing you that about 82% of the residential properties in Falmouth are single-family housing types. The extra small lot, they call it, is about 54%. So 0 to a half acre for that lot size. And then you have a small home lot, which is a half to 1 acre. And a medium lot is 1 to 2 acres. And a large home lot is about 2 acres. So you're seeing well over 50% of the housing lots in town are actually still under an acre in the community, even though we've had these zoning changes. So under our production plan, which Dave mentioned, which we in the partnership always look to for guidance, this was adopted in 2024. The recommendation was 80 housing units per year and 400 units by 2029. So as of 2025, we're at about 120 units. We still have a long way to go in 4 years to get to that 400 unit target. And so in priority year 2 under the housing production plan, one of the recommendations is to allow more diverse housing types in more areas. To focus on creating housing in complementary locations on previously disturbed sites. So really infill development for housing, rather than building large complexes using up valuable open space or being adverse to water resources, looking at infill development. And most importantly, to adjust the zoning for the housing production. So here we have the Falmouth zoning districts. Again, this is from the Cape Cod Commission. And we thought this was important just to show you how much land is actually residential zone land in the yellow, about 45%. In the light green, which is agricultural, there are housing developments as well. But what we're trying to do here is show you that these single-family only residential districts make up about half the town. This is the area that we think the focus can be on for this type of infill development for different housing types, diverse housing types, without altering the character of neighborhoods. And this is a land use map showing, the acreage in Falmouth, about 28,000 acres of land. We have about 32% of that in open space and recreation. But again, we show you this because a good portion of the land in Falmouth is designated for open space and recreation. And we want our housing supply to complement that, to go hand in hand with open space and water resources. So we thought or looked at 4 different housing types, which the boards in the back illustrate how to add housing to these neighborhoods without large impacts, to complement the character of the neighborhoods and the homes that are there. And so we're focusing on these 4 housing types: ADUs, which I'll call them accessory dwelling units, tiny houses, duplexes, and triplexes or 4-unit buildings, multifamily housing. So the first one is zoning for accessory dwelling units. And typically when people think of an accessory dwelling unit, they might think of a cottage in the backyard, but they actually come in many shapes and styles. You can have a detached cottage, you could have an addition to an existing home, you could have an upper level of a home, you could have a basement level above the garage, or you can convert a garage. So they do come in many different forms. And in Falmouth, we do have zoning currently for ADUs, and we wanted to show you some samples of what exists now. This is one in Falmouth, 800 square feet, and just some of the design elements. This one is in Katuitt, 740 square feet, small homes. These are both detached, obviously. And then this is another detached example in Eastham, 826 square feet. And this is an attached ADU above the garage in Falmouth Center. So again, you would hardly even really notice that there was an apartment there, but you have two dwellings here on that property in downtown Falmouth. And so the permitting for accessory dwelling units in Falmouth, in 2001, the town adopted the first ADU bylaw, which was called an accessory apartment bylaw at that time. And from 2001 to about 2018, there were 24 building permits issued under that bylaw. From 2018 to 2025, there have been another 26 permits issued. So it's almost doubled in 7 years for the ADU. And the reason is the zoning reform. So the zoning bylaw for the ADUs was revised in 2018, became less restrictive, caused more production of the ADUs. So in 2018, there was a reduction in the lot size. It was originally 15,000 square feet, which, as we showed you from the chart, a lot of lots can't meet that in Falmouth. Now it's 7,500. There was planning board approval and zoning board approval required, parking requirements. There was an owner occupancy requirement for 7 months. But in 2018, what was most significant, I think, was the restriction on the use of the ADU, having to rent it for certain income levels and have an enforcement mechanism, or to a nonprofit. That was eliminated in 2018, which was really a significant change because it allowed people the freedom to use the ADU as they needed to use it, whether it was a family member downsizing or to rent it for additional income. And in 2018, they specifically allowed for rental of the ADUs, which hadn't been allowed in the past, and some of the bedroom restrictions had been lifted. So generally an overhaul through a lot of community outreach, and did a good job of lifting some of those restrictive requirements to allow for, as I said, almost doubling of accessory dwelling units after this bylaw was changed. So in 2024, we have further revisions to the bylaw, thanks to the planning board. And the minimum lot size stayed at 7,500 square feet. The size of the unit increased to 900. Only one parking space is required. There were no owner occupancy restrictions anymore. So the requirement that the owner be on the property for 7 months was eliminated. And there was a 6-month rental period required, or more than 6 months. Interestingly enough, very recently the Attorney General has made some comments on this bylaw, so we may see further changes in the future. This just sort of came out in the past few days. But it may be that rental period is reduced to 30 days, and the lot size is eliminated, depending on how that goes. But we may see some further lifting of these restrictions. But the point is that this new reform should increase the ADU production. So in California, we've shown this example because California ADU history is really a success story. In 2016, they adopted less restrictive zoning bylaws. They eliminated owner occupancy restrictions, and they increased their permitting by 42%, so that 1 in 5 new homes in California is now an ADU, which is pretty remarkable. So tiny houses, this is another area that we've focused on. And tiny houses, I often get people ask me, what's the difference between a tiny house and an ADU, or why do we have tiny houses? Well, tiny houses are a little different. They are up to 400 square feet only under the Mass Building Code, And they can be on a fixed foundation or a wheeled trailer if local zoning permits that. So that's kind of important. And we've got some illustrations here to show you various tiny houses. This one in particular has a loft. But the thing that's different about the tiny houses is that the building code allows for exemptions to certain building requirements that wouldn't apply to an ADU. So, for example, the loft area in a tiny house is excluded from the square footage count. The ceiling heights are reduced. The building code allows for an alternative access to the loft. Rather than a traditional stairway with railings, you could have a ship ladder or open stairs, as was shown in this photo. And the secondary egress. So those of you that are familiar with building, usually you have to have two means of egress into a dwelling unit. So with the tiny homes, the emergency egress can be through a skylight or a window in the loft or some other mechanism, as long as it complies with the building code exemptions. So that's essentially the difference. And this is an example of a tiny house that's 384 square feet with a loft. And here's another view of it here. So it has all the basic living requirements, but you can also have a one-story tiny house with no loft, maybe for an older person who doesn't want to climb the stairs, or anybody who doesn't want to climb the stairs. The point is that the tiny house option is there. Under our accessory dwelling unit bylaw, we do not have a minimum size. Some towns have a minimum size. So in Falmouth, a tiny house would be up to 900 square feet. And the building code exemptions aren't under the zoning bylaw, they're under the building code. So a tiny house on a fixed foundation is permissible as an ADU in Falmouth. So why would somebody want to build a tiny house and not an ADU? Well, maybe they have a very small lot. Maybe they don't have enough lot area to meet the lot coverage requirements. Or maybe they can't meet setback requirements for that particular lot. So maybe a tiny house is an option for them versus an ADU that might meet building code. So again, just another option. If we wanted to go further with zoning reform and allow for tiny houses that are not on fixed foundations, that are on a movable trailer, then that would require a zoning bylaw amendment. We'd have to define a tiny house. We would have to include that it was on a movable trailer, and we would have to exclude it as an RV. And that's because under Massachusetts law, anything on wheels is considered an RV. So there would be some zoning bylaw amendments to allow that, but for if it was not on a fixed foundation. There's a couple of towns, Nantucket and Auburn, both have tiny house bylaws in place where they actually define the tiny house and put in a lot more detail on what it is. But here in Falmouth, it would be considered an accessory dwelling unit. So if it's on a fixed foundation, it should fit within the existing framework. So duplexes, another option for adding housing to our neighborhoods, infill development. We're giving you just some samples here of duplexes around town so that you can see that duplexes do fit within the framework of neighborhoods. Why would somebody want a duplex and not an ADU? Well, they might want more than 900 square feet. So they might want 2 units at 1,200 square feet or 1,500 square feet. So they wouldn't qualify under the ADU, but they might qualify under a duplex zoning change. A duplex could be an existing home that has 4 bedrooms. Somebody who's maybe older that wants to downsize and create 2 units in an existing home could create a duplex and possibly rent the other unit or make it available for family members. So this is another option. These are some examples of existing duplexes in town that have been permitted one way or the other to date. Not by right, meaning just going to the building department and getting a building permit, but you get a sense that this is the design, separate entrances. They look like single-family homes. This is one in downtown Falmouth. And this is another one in Falmouth Center, another duplex. So really, parking and access can all be consistent with a single-family home neighborhood. This is one in North Falmouth with different entrances. But again, the point is that they look just like single-family homes, but they're providing 2 housing units in one building. So our suggestion is that the zoning change to allow duplexes in single-family districts is very simple. You often see at town meeting or read about these very complex zoning changes that happen in Falmouth. This isn't complex. It's very simple. We have these use tables in our zoning bylaw, and what we're suggesting is under the single-family residential district, when it comes to duplexes, under the semi-detached and 2-family dwellings, we change the N, not allowed, to Y, allowed by right. Simple change of the chart. Check the box, yes. And what that means then is an owner can simply go to the building department, must of course review their wastewater, make sure they can comply that way, but go right to the building department, no special permit or discretionary approval, and apply to either build a duplex or convert their existing home into a duplex. Same thing in the agricultural district or similar. The chart would have to add the semi-detached and 2-family dwelling with a Y for check the box or add the box yes, to allow that in agricultural districts, which do contain a lot of single-family dwellings. So multifamily dwellings, another option. We're going to give you some samples here of multifamily, which could be 2, could be 3, could be 4, but for this purpose it's really 3 or 4 units we're looking at. There is a provision in the existing zoning bylaw that allows you to convert a home in existence in 1980 into up to 4 units by applying to the zoning board for a special permit. The zoning board reviews that. This is one of them that was 4 apartments and was approved by the zoning board in downtown Falmouth. And here's another one, 3 units approved by the zoning board in a single-family residential district. And here's another one, 4 units. So what we're suggesting is change the date of that section. Simple change of the zoning bylaw. Take out 1980 and put 2025, so that any home in Falmouth could go to the zoning board and apply for up to 4 units. The zoning board would review the parking and the access and the wastewater. All of that would go through that review, and it would be discretionary, but at least there would be an avenue for many, many homes that have been built since 1980 to be converted in this manner. In the business district, we have a provision now that says you can build duplexes by right. So if you have a property in a business district, you should be able to have 2 dwelling units. But it's only duplexes. So what we're suggesting is a zoning reform that allows for a triplex, 3 units in the business district. This is an example of a building downtown that has 3 apartments above the commercial space. And it meets the height requirements, it fits within the business district, fits within the neighborhood, and it's providing 3 housing units. This is an example just, of a sample plan of another 3-unit triplex that's a possibility, with small units on 2 levels. Right now, triplexes are allowed in the general residence district by special permit. So what we're suggesting is, since we're allowing duplexes by right and we allow triplexes in the general residence district, why not allow triplexes in the business district? And again, check the box, yes. It's a simple change, not complicated. Take the use chart of the zoning bylaw where it says 3-family, change the N from not allowed to Y for allowed by right. That means that the owner can simply apply to the building department, meet all the other requirements, and secure approval for the 3 units. So adding housing to our neighborhoods. And I should add here that, for those of you that aren't familiar with by right means directly to the building department. That's what we're talking about, going directly to the building department. No discretionary approval. It reduces the expense of permitting in terms of consultants, engineers. It reduces the time, but most importantly, it reduces the uncertainty of getting your approval. And with the way things are going now, the permitting is very expensive. Engineers are expensive, lawyers are expensive, architects are expensive. There's a lot to permitting. So if somebody's looking at investing in a property and they have a discretionary approval where someone can say no, then they might think twice about doing it. If they know that they have a by right option, it's going to make it a lot more attractive. So adding housing to our neighborhoods, it benefits the young workforce and it benefits the older residents looking to downsize. You have opportunities for passive income. You have a natural affordability with the size of these particular units. They're not large homes, an ADU or a tiny house or even an apartment in a business district. There's economic mobility. We talked originally about that American dream concept for people coming out of school or aging and wanting to move out of a rental into a small unit that they can purchase. That's economic mobility. And it frees up the housing for others that need rentals. And most importantly, you have a choice of housing types, which right now, given that most of our housing is single-family detached homes, our choice of housing types is limited. So people will often say, how do I do this? How do I build my ADU or my tiny house? And we've included in the handout there, the current ADU bylaw. We've included the tiny house building code appendix. We're suggesting that you check with the local planning office. There's a checklist and information in the packet. Contact a consultant, whether it's a builder, architect, engineer. Get somebody to look at your property for you to determine what you can build. You develop a site plan, you develop floor plans, and you apply for a building permit. If you wanted to convert your pre-1980 home by special permit, you'd go to the zoning office. And you would, again, check with a consultant. I mean, this is a simplified format, obviously, but the first stop is town hall. Develop a site plan, floor plans, determine what you can build. And obviously, wastewater is an issue. And you have to review your wastewater and make sure that you can build what you want to build. So bringing about the zoning changes, what are the next steps? The partnership, we're suggesting appeal to the planning board. Ask your planning board to consider this type of zoning reform. Not complicated, easy to understand, allow for these additional types of housing in our neighborhoods. Go to the planning board public sessions and speak. Contact your select board as well. Push for the zoning reform. And if that doesn't work, or you want to try an alternative option, you can talk to a town meeting rep. You can petition town meeting yourself if you're a registered voter. You can file a petition and get 10 other registered voters and ask town meeting to amend the zoning bylaw to address different housing types. So that is the presentation, and we thank you for listening and coming. This is our mission statement here for the partnership. And the national policy priority that was put out for zoning reform to expand the housing options, making housing attainable, and to boost the housing supply. So we hope that this was informative, and be happy to answer any questions of myself or the panel. Yeah.
Hold on a sec. Bob.
Is this
hold a
on?
sec.
Yep, test.
We have CTV. You know about this process. Bob Muscali, the chair of the board.
Just wondering if your presentation is going to be available, you're going to circulate it.
Yes, so the FCTV has it on a live YouTube feed now, and they're going to put it on demand as well. The PowerPoint, we can send it around or circulate it as needed. We can put it on the housing page at Town Hall, or the Housing Trust can put it on their website as well. Yeah, make sure it gets out there.
Yeah, good question. And we're going to ask Laura to reprise this presentation tomorrow at our Affordable Housing Committee meeting, just again to try to spread the word. So, right, and would you please identify yourself, sir, and then ask your question. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm Richard Johnson. I wonder if you could speak in general terms about the septic system requirements with duplexes and triplexes.
So right now, and Scott's here, and I won't put him on the spot, but sure, but right now the regulations are under review, so we have all, but my canned answer was that the regulations are under review, and we're all been watching the Board of Health proceedings to see what's going to be coming out, but since Scott's willing to talk, I think that's great. Thank you.
I'm Scott McGann, health agent. You guys hear me okay? Yeah, it's complicated. So Title V is Title V. So if you're adding bedrooms and you have a 3-bedroom septic and you're putting in a 4-bedroom septic, you're going to need to do something to your leaching. That's not going to change. Okay, so if you're adding bedrooms, obviously you're going to need to do something. The question now becomes about denitrification. The ADU bylaw now, if you're adding bedrooms and you're in a coastal pond overlay district, which is most of the town, about 15,000 homes, you'd be putting in the denitrification, which is going to cost you about $27,000 to buy, not counting installation. And you have an annual operation and maintenance, and sometimes that's a deal breaker. So that is in the bylaw now, but as of a couple days ago, it looks like that the state has said that that's no bueno. So that's been taken out in the last couple of days because you are treating ADUs different from you would be any other increase in flow. But still you have what I call straight Title V. You got a 3-bedroom and you go into 4 or 4 to 5. You'd still need to do something to your leaching if you don't have the capacity, and most people don't have capacity beyond the number of bedrooms. But the denitrification component for now is off the table as a specific ADU bylaw. However, we do have, if you're not familiar with, new regulations, well, they're not new now, they're a couple years old, that state that the town needs to clean up their wastewater, in nitrogen primarily, in our coastal pond overlays or nitrogen-sensitive areas, which is the same term. Coastal pond overlay is a historical term used by Falmouth, and it's been coined nitrogen-sensitive by DEP, but they're interchangeable for this point. That we need to clean it up. So this is where it gets complicated. We'll be doing, and you know, we're looking for an outfall pipe and we're looking to do some sewering, but that doesn't mean we're not going to need to be putting these IAs in the future. So the problem comes when, let's just take a watershed, for example, that has an assumption of 10,000 kilograms of nitrogen per year. And we're doing our plans based on that. But over time, as we add flow, and in Title V, that's bedrooms, that number of 10,000 is going to change over time. It's going to go higher, right? So the Board of Health, in order to sort of cap the 10,000, has got a proposed regulation that's still in the draft, hasn't gone to a public hearing, that all new construction, and in new construction under Title V is building new homes, so the lot has no bedrooms. Adding bedrooms, so you've got a 3-bedroom home and you want to put a 2-bedroom ADU, that's clearly an addition of a bedroom, or a raise and rebuild, would have to put denitrification in at that point so that the 10,000 number doesn't slowly creep up over time. It's not a regulation yet, okay? It's in the draft. So right now you're at a point where the ADUs aren't being picked on anymore for the denitrification, but if the regulation, and I don't have an answer for you whether ADUs would be exempt at this point, but the Board of Health is saying, well, we can't just continue to increase flow and then try to fix the problem as the problem's increasing. And so, and most people are in an ADU. If you're not in Sipawissat or Woods Hole or in a couple little spots here and there, you're pretty much in a nitrogen-sensitive area. anything east of the high school to Wacoit's, all in a nitrogen-sensitive area, most of North Falmouth, good chunk of West Falmouth, and some of Sipawicet if you're next to Quistit Harbor. So it's complicated, and it changes. So like if you would talk to me last week, I would say if you have an ADU and you're putting in an extra bedroom and you're in a nitrogen-sensitive area, you need to put the D-Nite in. If you ask me today, I just happened to be walking on a job site today where they're constructing the ADU. The foundation's in, and the septic system is in because they're far apart, so they're two separate septic systems. And he was going to eliminate a bedroom in the house because he wanted to have, because one of the things is if you're not adding bedrooms and you do an ADU with 4-bedroom, let's say you have a 4-bedroom home, and you want to do a 1-bedroom ADU, you could eliminate a bedroom in the house. There's no increase in the number of bedrooms. You don't need to do the D-Nite. So the denitrification system, that's $35,000, most people, what they were doing is eliminating a bedroom in the main house. I happened to tell him that day, I just talked to the town planner, and the town planner said the state said what they said. I'm not going to make you take the bedroom out. And he was very, very happy. I think he bought a lottery ticket that night. So unfortunately, if you're planning to do this and you're watching this, you need to call me, and I'll give you this down because it's very specific to each property. But the good news is you don't need to do it specifically for an ADU. You wouldn't have to put the denitrification. Unless the Board of Health has a regulation that says everybody, because then they're treating everybody the same. And again, the reason why is we can't just not put the D-Nites in forever, and then all of a sudden, magically, when the plans are done, just slam in 5,000 denitrifications in a year. That's not going to happen. So it looks like if the board has this reg, and the reg, let's say, I'm going to make up a date, October 1st, has a regulation, and you pull a building permit that shows me an increase in flow, i.e. bedrooms, you would be putting in the denitrification at that point in time. There could be a scenario where the state says ADUs might be exempt from that. I don't necessarily see that because you're not treating ADUs any different from you are any other increase in flow. Does that make sense? So I think maybe at that point you might need to do it. It is about $35,000 to put in, and it's going to cost you about $1,200 a year to maintain because you have to have a quarterly operator come out to check to make sure that it's working. They send the sample to the lab. It's a big thing, okay? And if it costs the construction's $300,000, it's 10%, or $350,000 for the ADU. You're paying 10% more to put the fancy thing in your septic system, okay? So unfortunately, it changes, and like what I would have told somebody last week is a little different from what I'm telling somebody this week. I apologize. Does everybody understand anybody have any questions on it? I apologize, it's just so infinitely complex. The days of putting in a septic system, letting it just go out in the dirt and call it a day is over.
You can stream this later and slow down his speech and
Am I
get it
talking
more,
too
and
quickly?
replay it so you can get it. Just to
Or
let you know.
call me. I do this about 4 hours a day. I have this same conversation.
Just a more specific, for instance, if you were planning to build a duplex or a triplex for sale as individual units, would they require separate septic systems?
No, you would probably be putting in a shared system among the 4 units. Actually, you more likely you wouldn't be putting in separate. Like the scenario I said, we had 2 separate septic systems today. Now, if he is captured in the future wastewater plans, again, we have these plans that we're working on where a lot of people will need to put them in regardless if they're touching their house or no. There's a scenario where we sewer X number of homes, we're making up numbers, 70% of the way there. Where do we get our other 30%? And we may have to have people putting in the D-Nites, so you still might have to put it in. If you're putting in 2 separate septics, now you're paying for 35 for that one and 35 for the other. So I try to see maybe if you're putting a duplex in, you'd probably want to put 1 septic. It'd have to be a 2-compartment tank because that's a whole nother issue. DEP has said if it's no longer a single-family residence, you need to put a 2-compartment tank or 2 tanks in series. So even if you're not having to add to your leaching, you're taking the bedroom out of the house, right, and putting it into the ADU, there's still that 2-compartment tank requirement. So that's why it's complicated. I hope I didn't go too quickly. I try to talk slow, but I have trouble doing that. Yeah, seriously, any questions? Yep.
That's why I smiled when you asked the question, because we knew this was going to be fully loaded.
Questions? Yes, sir. Art?
Hi, thanks. Yeah, Art
Would you
Dislogius, I'm
introduce
from Plymouth. Do you have any experience with starter home overlay zoning districts?
We do not have a starter home overlay district here in Falmouth. There's been some discussion about it at the planning board level. So the Cape Cod Commission has recommended 2 areas for the town to look at for starter homes. One is the downtown area, and the other one is Woods Hole for the actual district. So, but it hasn't been adopted in Falmouth. The first step is to look at the districts where the districts should be, and then the next step is to adopt a starter home bylaw. But certainly, we would love to see a starter home district and bylaw in place. Because they are, up to 1,800 square feet of heated living space. They are the small home that we're talking about here. They're perfect for workforce housing or for young couples, but to buy because they're naturally affordable due to their size. But they're also great for older people who want to downsize. And what we're seeing here in Falmouth is that we have a large population of homes that are occupied by 1 or 2 people only. And that's because the property values have gone up so high, there's not a lot of options for those people to sell their homes and then downsize into something smaller. There are no smaller options. If those larger homes were opened up for families or other people that could fill the homes, we would have this kind of economic mobility. But to date, we do not have any bylaws or districts here in town.
Michael?
Thanks. And Laura, great presentation. Thank you very much. So I'm Michael Galasso. I'm an affordable housing developer on the Falmouth Housing Authority, too. And I think the town's made some good progress with accessory dwelling units, but I think one of the issues is if we're going to try to scale this up is that we're basically asking homeowners to become developers. I know you put up those 5 steps that you have to go through, but it's time-consuming, it's expensive. And I was wondering, in your research, if you've come across any towns or ADUs that are built on people's backyards where the homeowner rents their backyard to an ADU developer, and then the ADU developer goes through all the steps, builds the unit, takes care of renting it out and managing it. So the homeowner is only renting part of their backyard and getting, let's say, $500, $1,000 a month for that. But they don't have to go through all that process, and we get more units.
Yeah, I think that in Vail, Colorado is a great example community where they have become super innovative on things like that. I'm not aware of a specific community in Massachusetts, but I do know in Vail they have a program in place where the city itself essentially pays the owner to either a subsidy or some other income to build the ADU. They help them build the ADU, and then they ensure that it's rented with certain rental restrictions. The town of Amherst is also kind of a model town because they've had a significant increase in ADU permitting, and I'm not sure if it's from something like that, a municipal program, but those are sort of model towns to look up and see what is going on there, because their ADU numbers are just exploding, and they're also finding that people are always concerned about short-term rentals, but in these types of communities where they are lifting the zoning restrictions and promoting the ADU development, whether it's through subsidies or the type of situation you're talking about, that they are being primarily used for year-round rentals, which is kind of interesting. Everybody's always afraid about short-term rentals, but primarily being used as year-round rentals.
Other questions? In the back.
My name's Lynn Shad. I might have missed it because I came in late, but are there any requirements for these either accessory dwelling units or tiny homes or the duplexes, triplexes to be energy efficient? Like, do they require heat pumps and, things like that, or solar to make them more energy efficient?
Well, any new construction is subject to the building code, the stretch code in Falmouth as it's been adopted. We've got a couple of architects here, I'm sure, that know that, but so there aren't any specific requirements under zoning, but under the building code requirements that have been adopted in the community, there are certain requirements. So I know with the Housing Trust, we're building 5 homes in Wacoit right now. It's all about the level of insulation, the vapor barriers. The heat pumps are voluntary, but there are rebates available from the Cape Light Compact. So that's sort of an incentive to go that additional step. But under the zoning bylaw, no. Under the building code, yes.
I have one question to follow up on your presentation, Laura. You mentioned that the Attorney General's office has sent back a set of required changes in the proposed bylaw, the ADU bylaw. What's the next step with that process? Does it have to go back to the town meeting? Is it something the select board can resolve? What's the next step?
Well, the town planner's here, so he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll give it a shot. So the Attorney General accepted some of the provisions of the bylaw and struck others. So the Attorney General struck the minimum lot size of 7,500 square feet. Said you can't have a minimum lot size under the bylaw. So that has not been approved. The Attorney General struck the maximum number of bedrooms at 2 bedrooms. That was not approved. The Attorney General struck the language in the bylaw that says that the ADU is to be complementary to a single-family residential home. And they struck the word single-family, saying that the Falmouth zoning bylaw allows for dwelling units in business districts, so you can't limit this to single-family type ADUs. You should be allowing ADUs in all districts. The provisions that are in about the Water Resource Protection District and the Coastal Pond Overlay District, those were all struck. So what they're saying essentially, and also there were provisions in the bylaw that the planning board could reject an application if there were certain provisions of the planning board rules that were not followed, such as not providing sufficient information. That was considered to be a violation of the law, as well as having to provide information statements as to landscaping and that your ADU is, somehow complying with neighborhood impacts or something like that. So general narrative information to support your ADU, the state has basically said, no, can't require that. So so what happens? I guess in my opinion, it's up to the planning board if they want to move to allow the ADU bylaw to sit as it is with those provisions struck and continue their site plan review process, or go back to town meeting and make some recommended changes to the bylaw, maybe to tailor some of those things to be in keeping with their original intent, but perhaps not violating the law, as the Attorney General has said. So that's, I think, a planning board decision to do that or not. Is that good? Okay, I got a thumbs up. All right.
Thumbs up from the town planner. Any other questions? All right. I want to thank you all for coming. We're going to hang around here for those who want to have individual chats. Appreciate Scott McGann coming tonight to help us with that nasty issue that's very complicated. And Bob Mascali being here, Colin Reed from the Select Board. Thank you very much to everybody. Thanks to the Housing Trust and for Laura's help in driving this process. So please join me again in thanking Laura for her presentation.
And I'd just also like to thank the town planner and our housing coordinator for all their work in helping with the partnership, and as well as the committee itself for all the work that's gone into this. So I wanted to mention too that the boards at the back are just samples. They're not meant to be, promoting anybody's plans or anything like that. They're just sample plans that we dug up that can show people what a duplex can look like, so it doesn't look like a duplex, and what it looks like inside. That's really the intent of the boards. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate your involvement.